The bishop came to my house 3 times after dark, and each time he came, he brought a different man with him. I want you to understand what that meant in my world before I tell you what happened. When a bishop walks up your lane at night, uninvited, with the moon already high and the children already sleeping, he is not coming as a neighbor. He is coming as the closest thing to God that a woman in my community will ever stand in front of. And I stood in front of him at 51 years old, in my own kitchen, in my own house, and I learned exactly what a bishop was allowed to do to a wife who had said out loud that she wanted to leave. Before I go any further, I'm Anna, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I share the truths we were never permitted to speak inside the community that raised me. I grew up Old Order Amish, and I lived as an Amish wife for more than 30 years before I left. If you value hearing what Amish life is actually like from a woman who lived the whole of it, not a summer of it, subscribe and tap the like button. And tell me in the comments, before you hear the rest, did you know a bishop was allowed to come to a woman's home at night at all? Let me explain how a woman like me ends up where I ended up, because I was not young. That is the part people find hard to understand. When you picture someone leaving the Amish, you picture a teenager during Rumspringa, a boy of 19 with a car he isn't supposed to have. You do not picture a grandmother. But I was a grandmother. I was baptized at 19. I married at 20. I raised 7 children in a farmhouse outside of Holmes County, Ohio. I buried 2 of them, one as an infant and one as a grown man. And it was somewhere in my late 40s, after the children were gone and the house went quiet, that I began to understand I had spent my entire life obeying, and I had never once been asked what I wanted. That is a dangerous thought for an Amish woman. It arrives quietly. It arrives while you are canning tomatoes in August with your hands stained red and your husband out in the field, and you suddenly cannot remember a single decision in your whole life that had been yours. Not where you lived, not who you married, not the number of children you bore, not the clothes on your body or the part in your hair or the words in your mouth on a Sunday morning. All of it had been decided for me by the Ordnung, our unwritten but iron code, and by the men who kept it. And for most of my life, I did not experience that as a cage. I want to be honest about that. For 30 years, it felt like belonging. It felt like being held. It is only when something small breaks loose in you that you begin to see the walls you have been leaning against your whole life. I made the mistake of saying this out loud, not to a stranger, to my own husband, Amos, a good and quiet man who had never once raised his hand to me in 31 years. I told him one night that I did not know if I still believed, and that I thought I might want to leave. I want to be fair to Amos. He did not shout. He did not strike me. He did something that, in our world, was far more powerful. The next morning, without a word to me, he went to the bishop. You have to understand what that meant. In the English world, if a wife tells her husband she is unhappy, that is a private matter between 2 people. In my world, there is no such thing as a private matter. The community is the marriage. The church is the marriage. And a woman who wants to leave is not a sad woman. She is a sick limb. And a sick limb threatens the whole body. So the body responds. And the way the body responds, the tools the bishop is permitted to use, that is what nobody outside ever sees. Before I tell you what he did, let me tell you about a woman named Miriam, because her story is the reason I understood what was coming. Miriam was older than me, a widow in the next district, and years before, she had tried to leave after her husband passed. I remember the whispers about her at a quilting bee when I was still a young wife, the way the women lowered their voices and looked at the door. They said the bishop had gone to her house. They said she had come back to church within the month, gray in the face, and never spoke of the English world again. As a young woman, I heard that story and thought, how good, how merciful that they brought her back. It took me 30 years and my own 3 nights at my own table to understand that what I had heard described as mercy was something else entirely. Miriam did not come back because she was persuaded. She came back because she was broken. And now it was my turn. The first tool is called the visit. It sounds gentle. It is not. 3 nights after I spoke to Amos, I was washing the supper dishes when I heard a buggy in the lane. I looked out the window and saw the bishop climbing down, and behind him a second man, one of the ministers. My hands went cold in the dishwater because I knew. A bishop does not come to your door at night to ask after your health. He comes because you have been reported. He sat at my kitchen table. I want you to picture the smallness of it. My kitchen, my table, the table where I had fed my children 10,000 times, and this man sitting at the head of it as though it were his own. He did not ask me if the accusation was true. He told me what I had done. He told me I had let the devil into my heart through idleness and pride. Hochmut, pride. In our community, pride is the root of every sin, and wanting a life of your own is the purest form of pride there is. He told me my doubt was not mine. It was an infection, and he had come to draw it out of me. He spoke for a long time. He quoted scripture I had heard 1,000 times, about wives submitting, about the woman being made for the man, about the peace of a quiet and obedient spirit. And the whole time, the minister beside him said nothing at all, only watched me. And somehow the silent one frightened me more than the one who spoke. I sat there in my own house, and I felt like a child called to the front of the schoolhouse. That is the first thing the bishop is allowed to do, and it is the most effective thing of all. He is allowed to make a 51-year-old woman feel like she is 8 years old and has wet herself in front of the whole class. He is allowed to strip away in 20 minutes at your own table every ounce of adulthood you have ever earned. And you let him because in that moment some part of you that is still a small girl in a one-room schoolhouse rises up and believes him, believes that he speaks for God, believes that the shame flooding through you is the proof that he is right. I need to pause here and tell you something, because if I only tell you the hard parts, you will not understand why I stayed as long as I did. Between his visits, life went on, and life inside the Amish world has a sweetness the English rarely see. The morning after that first visit, 3 women I had known my whole life came to my door with bread and with soup, and they said nothing about the bishop, and they sat with me, and for an hour I was simply held by people who had known me since I was a girl. That is the thing that makes leaving so hard. The same community that sends a man to your table at night also sends women to your table in the morning. The cage is warm. That is what makes it a cage. But I have to tell you what came next, because this is the part I have never said out loud until now. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The bishop came a second time, and this time he brought a different man, an older minister from a neighboring district, brought in the way you bring in a doctor for a second opinion when the first medicine has not worked. And the second tool came out. That tool is the threat of the ban, the Meidung, shunning. I want to explain the ban carefully because English people hear the word and think it means the silent treatment. It does not. The ban is the total, deliberate, community-wide erasure of a human being. If I was placed under the ban, my own children would not be permitted to eat at the same table as me. My daughters could not accept anything from my hand. My grandchildren would be taught that I was lost. My husband would be instructed to withdraw from me as a wife in every way. I would still be alive, still living in the same valley, and I would be treated as though I had died, except worse, because the dead are mourned and the shunned are refused even that. The bishop sat at my table and described this to me, calmly, the way you would describe the weather. He was allowed to. That is the second thing a bishop is permitted to do. He is permitted to sit in your kitchen and describe the erasure of your entire family from your life, and to make clear that whether it happens is entirely up to how obedient you decide to become. And here is the thing that took me years and a great deal of help to see clearly. He never once made a threat, not in the way the English mean the word. He never raised a hand, never said a cruel thing, never lifted his voice above the level of a man saying grace. Everything he described as the natural consequence of my own choice, as though he were only a messenger telling me about weather that was already coming. That is the genius of it, and I use that word carefully. The cruelty is built so deep into the structure that the man delivering it can believe, truly believe, that he is being kind. He thought he was saving my soul. That is what I have had to sit with. He was not a monster in his own mind. He was a shepherd, and I was the sheep who had wandered, and everything he did to me, he did out of what he understood as love. That is far more terrible than a monster. A monster you can flee. Love that erases you, you invite back inside. I did not sleep for a long time after that visit, and I began to do a thing that I think will sound strange to you. I began to prepare, quietly. In the daytime, when Amos was in the field, I began to set aside a few things. A little money I had saved from selling eggs, kept where no one would look. The name of a woman I had heard of, an ex-Amish woman, 2 counties over, who was said to help people who wanted out. I hid these things the way the women in my mother's generation hid the knowledge of their own bodies, sideways, in silence, disguised as something ordinary. I sewed the money into the hem of an old work dress and hung it back in the closet between all the others. And every morning I saw it there, and it was the only thing in that house that was truly mine. The third visit was the one I will never forget as long as I live. It was later than the others, near 10 o'clock, and the house was fully dark, and I heard not one buggy, but 2. The bishop came in with 2 ministers, and behind them my own husband, Amos, who would not meet my eyes, 4 men in my kitchen and me. And I understood that this was no longer a visit. This was a proceeding. They did not raise their voices. I want to be honest about that because the absence of shouting is part of how it works. A man who shouts, you can hate. A man who speaks softly while he takes your life apart, you begin to believe. The bishop told me that a decision had been reached. that I would confess my sin of pride before the full church on the coming Sunday on my knees, before 300 people who had known me my whole life, that I would ask their forgiveness, that I would submit myself again fully to my husband and to the Ordnung, and that if I did this, the matter would end and I would be restored. And if I did not, the ban would begin the following morning, and I would lose all 7 of my living grandchildren in a single day. I looked at Amos then, my husband of 31 years, the man I had borne 9 children for and buried 2 beside. I looked at him and I waited for him to say one word in my defense. One word. And he studied the grain of the table as though it were scripture, and he said nothing at all. And I think that silence hurt me more than anything the bishop said in all 3 nights combined, because the bishop was doing his office. Amos was choosing. That is the third and final thing a bishop is allowed to do. He is allowed to come to your home at night with your own husband beside him and give you a choice that is not a choice. He is allowed to make you understand, without ever once touching you, that your body and your soul and your family are not your own and never were. I have thought many times since about how strange it is that in all of it, no law was broken. No English court would have found anything wrong in 3 men sitting at a kitchen table and talking. That is the part I want you to sit with. Everything done to me was legal. Everything done to me was by the rules of my own church, holy, and it nearly ended me all the same. The most dangerous kind of control is the kind that never has to break a single law to work. I want to tell you what I did, and I want to tell you why I can tell you at all. I knelt. That Sunday at 51 years old in front of 300 people on the hard wooden floor of a farmhouse, I confessed to a sin I did not believe was a sin. I said the words, I asked their forgiveness, and they gave it, and they wept. And the women held me, and for a few months I let myself believe that I had chosen peace. But something had changed in me at that kitchen table on the 3rd night, when I watched 4 men decide the shape of the rest of my life, while my husband looked at the floor. I understood, finally and completely, that there was no version of that room in which I was a full human being. There was only the version where I obeyed and was loved, and the version where I refused and was erased. And a love that is only offered on the condition of your total disappearance is not love. It is a leash. I left the following spring. I was 52 years old. I want to tell you that it was clean and brave, but it was neither. It was done in the dark, with a bag I had hidden in the barn, and a phone number written on a scrap of paper, and a heart so full of terror I could barely breathe. I took the old work dress, with the money still sewn in its hem, and I have kept that dress to this day. The cost came exactly as the bishop had promised. The ban was placed. My children will not sit at a table with me. I have grandchildren I have never been allowed to hold. Letters go unanswered. When I see my own daughter in a store in town, she turns her cart around. Everything the bishop said he was allowed to do, he did. He was telling the truth about his power. That is the thing I have had to make peace with. He was not lying. In therapy, after I left, I learned words that do not exist in Pennsylvania Dutch: coercion, autonomy, consent, spiritual abuse. My therapist said something to me once that I have carried every day since. She said, Anna, control does not always arrive as a raised fist. Sometimes it arrives as a soft-spoken man at your kitchen table, offering you your family back in exchange for yourself. And I sat in that office, a woman in her 50s, and I finally understood every one of those 3 nights. I understood, too, that I was not the first woman in that valley this had been done to, and I would not be the last. Somewhere tonight there is another Miriam, another Anna, hearing a buggy in her lane after dark and going cold at the sink. I do not tell you this to make you hate the Amish. I will not do that because it would not be true to my life. That world gave me real things. It gave me a community that showed up for every birth and every burial. It gave me a faith that, wounded as it is, I have not fully let go of. It gave me hands that know how to work and a heart that knows how to endure. But there is no scripture that makes a woman the property of the men who govern her. There is no God I can believe in now who sends 4 men to a kitchen at night to bargain with a mother over her own grandchildren. The bishop was allowed to do what he did. That is not the same as it being right. And the reason I say all of this out loud now into a camera to strangers is that silence was the whole machine. Silence was how it worked on Miriam and on me and on every woman before us. If even one woman hears this and knows, when the buggy comes up her lane, that what is about to happen to her is not holy and not her fault, then this was worth the cost of saying. If you grew up in a place where obedience was called love and leaving was called death, I see you. If a soft-spoken man ever sat across a table from you and made your own family into a ransom, I see you too. You are not proud for wanting a life of your own. You are human, and being human was never the sin they told you it was. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is.